that bilingual education can be helpful for children.
Hi, I'm Scott London, and today I'm here with Richard Rodriguez, the author of Hunger of Memory. In Hunger of Memory, you suggest that the supporters of bilingual education are misguided. You write, "What they don't seem to recognize is that, as a socially disadvantaged child, I considered Spanish to be a private language. In what ways was Spanish a private language for you?"
In some countries, of course, Spanish is a language spoken in public. But for many American children whose families speak Spanish at home, it becomes a private language. They use it to keep the English-speaking world at bay. Bilingual education advocates say it's important to teach a child in his or her family language. I say you can't use a family language in the classroom. The very nature of the classroom requires that you use a language publicly. Intimacy is not what classrooms are about.
My feeling is that that children should be bilingual, trilingual. My nephew, my glamorous nephew, who looks like Keanu Reeves, is 13 years old and he speaks Mandarin. His favorite subject is Latin. He speaks Spanish. Do I like that? Yes. My nephew, who looks like Keanu Reeves, goes to a very fancy prep school in San Francisco. His father is a judge. My very fancy nephew in San Francisco understands one thing about language that poor children do not understand as easily. Why is it, I keep asking friends of mine of the political left, why is it that you cannot understand the significance of social class in the way we talk about all of these issues? Social class has a great deal to do with language. One of the things children of poverty need to know how to do very early, it was certainly true with me, was to speak language publicly. This is as true for the kid in Bedford-Stuyvesant as it is for the Appalachian white kid in West Virginia. They do not know how to speak language publicly. For poor kids, the great bilingual debate is between public language and private language.
Hunger for Memory is an autobiography about Richard Rodriguez, son of Mexican Catholic immigrant parents, living in Sacramento, California, going through trials and tribulations of maintaining his Mexican culture, Spanish language, and family ties, going through an educational system that does not support his private language, and ergo private culture and lifestyle. He is faced with the dilemma to hold on to what he knows or leave his heritage behind to pursue a closer tie to the white English-only society in which he is living in. This book discusses discrimination, colorism, and self-portrayal of his coming-of-age story, as well as how it relates to his educational experience and relevant educational topics such as bilingualism and affirmative action. Some of the key points are role of identity in the surrender/loss of language, loss of connection to family, pains of assimilation, naming and claiming of new identities, white imperialism and colonialism, and dehumanizing/devaluing aspects of the immigrant and generational experience.
My only advantage at that point was that I was about to be educated by Irish Catholic nuns. And for any of you who know anything about Irish Catholicism or Irish Catholic nuns, you will know one thing, and that is that there is no sentimentality when it comes to education among the Irish. And they took a look at Richard Rodriguez coming through that door, shy, timid, afraid, the minority, culturally, who didn't want anything to do with los otros, los gringos, the kid who wanted to sit by himself, be by himself. Well, those Irish women came 6,000 miles to California, and they were not about to let me out of their hands. They picked on me. That one with the mustache, she was picking on me all the time. Stand up. Say your name in a loud and clear voice so all the boys and girls can hear you. Well, I didn't want all the boys and girls to hear me. Why would I want to use language that way, publicly? Get your hands out of your pockets, Richard. Look up at me. Why don't you look up when you speak? 2 months, 4 months, 5 months, they badgered and badgered and badgered. They picked on the minority. They wouldn't let me be. I wanted to go home. I wanted to be alone. And they said that I had some obligation to all the boys and girls in this room. I should use my voice in this loud voice and speak publicly. Why? I was a minority. I belonged elsewhere. I belonged with my own family. I belonged behind a door. And the Irish chased me. They chased me home. They came into the house one day, 3 nuns looking like 3 furies from a Greek tragedy. They sat on the blue sofa. They said to my mother, "Why don't you speak more English in the home to your son?" My mother said, "Yes. Good idea." And at first it was a kind of game. We would sit around at this time of the night. After dinner, we would conjugate English verbs and we would put Spanish endings on them. Tocamos. One day the game came to an end. One day I walked into the kitchen when my mother and father were speaking Spanish to one another. I did not realize that they were speaking Spanish to one another until I walked into the kitchen, and the moment that they saw me, they started speaking English, albeit broken. That day, the bird was pushed out of the nest. The story comes to an end. That day, I must have been 7 years old. That day, I was a long way from being a minority, because I walked into the classroom and I was willing to have Ireland have its will. I was willing to speak in a loud and clear voice so all the boys and girls can hear me. This voice that I am using now is Ireland's voice. When people praise me right now for my genius, for my talent, for my skill with language, they are saying nothing. They are speaking about a group of 8 Irish women who came to California in the 1950s. That's their voice. Listen to it.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa once remarked on the dishonesty of European involvement in Africa in the context of Christian missionaries. As he describes the way religion was used for the benefit of Christian missionaries, he states, "When the missionaries came to Africa, they had the Bible and we had the land. They said, 'Let us pray.' We closed our eyes. When we opened them, we had the Bible and they had the land." An unfortunate yet common truth about the teaching of religion, especially Christianity and its branches to people of color around the world, is that it has historically been used as a tool for indoctrinating the cultural symbols and practices of the settler and erasing the tradition and memory of the people being taught. Even the language we use with regard to religion, converting, suggests a level of surrender and relinquishing of something once had, often at the expense of the marginalized. This relates to Rodriguez's experience as an immigrant because in many ways, being educated in this country forced him to distance himself from established Mexican cultural and familial practices for success in English-speaking institutions.
On page 19 and 20, Richard Rodriguez talks about what I believe the day that changed his life forever. The day when 2 Irish nuns, his teachers, came to his house to talk to his parents about speaking English at home. Of course my parents complied, Rodriguez writes. What would they not do for their children's well-being? And how could they have questioned the church's authority which those women represented? In an instant, they agreed to give up the language that had revealed and accentuated our family's closeness. This reflects the Chilean portrait by Gary Mistral you see here, because the priest is indoctrinating young children to his imperial standard, creating a workforce that empowers himself, not the children he is interacting with. This is exactly the same approach the nuns did in forging a pedagogical genocide that only replenishes the fruits of enslaved labor to nurture the teacher, not the student. Which carries a power dynamic that is shown in the portrait and in the text. One of the strengths that this book has is that it quickly and directly dives into the world of Richard Rodriguez in a very emotional manner. From the beginning to end, you feel his pain based on the predicaments he was going through, whether it was being forced to adjust to a English-based white upper middle class standard, as he perceived it was the only goal he noted worth of achieving in the pursuit of higher education, to leaving his culture, language, and bond with his family to achieve the American dream. The book shares why he believes what he believes. It is because of his upbringing, influences, and his educational experiences, particularly with those Irish nuns. The author paints a vibrant picture for his readers of the life he is pursuing and the life he is losing.
One weakness in Richard Rodriguez's argument includes his belief that holding on to cultural identifiers and relics is a trait of a person in denial that education has changed them. Throughout the text, Rodriguez writes in ways that make me think he equates education to proximity with whiteness, that the more one is educated, the greater in proximity they are to white ideals. On page 171, he says, "I was a scholarship boy who belonged in an earlier time. I came to campus singly, they came in a group. I had been submissive, willing to mimic my teachers, willing to reform myself in order to become educated. They were proud, claiming they didn't need to change by becoming students. I had long before accepted the fact that education exacted a great price for its equally great benefits. They denied that price any loss." This belief troubles me because it ignores the existence and necessity of duality. It suggests that in order to be educated and deemed successful, one must give up some part of themselves. In the case of the students of color, their language and cultural practices. They must soften their accents and suppress urges to connect and speak with others with whom they identify. For many minorities of all identities, this duality is not only something that helps us navigate the world, it is a set of lenses that makes the pursuit of education and success purposeful and joyful. This belief weakens Rodriguez's argument that education is more divisive than race because it implies non-white as uneducated and in need of salvation, just like the Africans and missionaries in Desmond Tutu's anecdote.
Statistics, dates, and iconic images tell one story about a country, but to catch the subtleties and the spirit of a country, individual experience can capture what the big picture often misses. American writer Richard Rodriguez first encountered America as a little boy, speaking only Spanish in his native California. Today, he is one of America's finest essayists. His most recent collection of essays is Darling, a spiritual autobiography. And he joins us now on what his experience can tell us about the U.S. state of mind. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
In the province of Ontario. Your life, if we can use the lingo of today, went a little bit viral when you published in the early 80s your book, Hunger of Memory, and in it you revealed that you turned down Yale, which is not a thing that most people would do, I guess.
Well, Yale was romancing me, as a number of other schools were, because they thought I was a Mexican. They thought I was a minority. They thought I was disadvantaged. And they wanted somebody like that to teach English Renaissance literature. And the absurdity of it all, I had long ceased to be, in my mind, a minority in a cultural sense. I already as a teenager, I thought of myself as an American, no longer separated by language.
Despite the fact you spoke no English till age 6.
Well, but I had the huge change in my life was that I was influenced by Ireland. I was educated by Irish Catholic nuns who did not fool around. The Irish can convince you maybe on March 17th that they're all sentimental and sweet with Danny Boy, but these are tough creatures. And those Irish women had come across the ocean, had traveled across the country to shove the English language down my throat, which they did. It took about a year and a half. And one day I raised my hand and I had the conviction that English, this language that I'm using, is my language. And from that change already began this education of Richard Rodriguez to no longer feeling himself separate. What happened to my life is that I was very lucky, but I entered a realm of irony where I was rewarded by the time I was in college with being a minority. And by that, people meant that I was literally a numerical minority. The higher up I went, precisely because I was not a cultural minority. In other words, that as I ascended the educational ladder, I found myself in a more and more rarefied world, so that I was numerically a minority, precisely because I was not separate from that world. I was not a cultural minority.